When you mentioned my book, Hatred's Kingdom, what immediately came to mind was an old development. It was when a Wahhabi army in 1802 went into Ottoman Iraq and slaughtered 5,000 Shiites, claiming they were infidels and didn't deserve to live. That was my first serious introduction to the Shiite-Sunni conflict in the little corner of Middle East studies that I was analyzing. Tonight's event is called Israel, the Jews, and the Sunni-Shiite conflict, which suggested to me a kind of question of where should we put our chips, with the Sunnis or with the Shiites? And there's a temptation, perhaps when you're confronted with this subject, to try and look into some of the subjects that Professor Lewis raised, such as the fact that a Jew touching an apple or any kind of food item gives it ritual impurity in Shiite Islam, but not in Sunni Islam. But is that how we should decide on that basis what our alliances should be in the Middle East? I tend to doubt it. In fact, Israel has confronted this question of where to put its chips in the conflict on repeated occasions, and Ephraim certainly surveyed a number of them. I'll go back a little bit into the history to go into the present very quickly. The fact of the matter is, when Israel has been confronted with this question of where its loyalties should be in this huge Middle Eastern question, it's really decided the issue on the basis of strategic circumstances and strategic interests, and not, how a Shiite mosque is different from a Sunni mosque, or whatever the particulars are of their religious practices. I think that one of the first moments where we confronted this question was in the First Lebanon War back in 1982. Because as you remember, the First Lebanon War involved Israel confronting a Sunni-led bloc in Lebanon and supporting the Lebanese front, which at that time was mostly the Christian Phalangist armies and some allies they had. But when Israel went into Lebanon, it was fighting the PLO, which had allied itself with the Sunnis and the Druze, and the Shiites celebrated our arrival. In fact, many people in our Ministry of Defense at the time were thinking about maybe we had an opportunity to create an alliance with the Shia of southern Lebanon against the PLO Sunni Druze bloc, which was our adversary at the time. Well, the idea of the alliance and working with Amal didn't quite work out, because that kind of moderate direction and that direction in the Shia community in southern Lebanon, which embraced Israel's arrival and Israel's defeat of the PLO, was quickly replaced because of the activities of revolutionary Iran, which even before the 1982 war decided to dispatch revolutionary guards to the Bekaa, to the area of Baalbek, and to create a new Shiite party that would compete with Amal, the older Shiite party, and that new party eventually became Hezbollah. And while the Shiites initially embraced us, once revolutionary Iran put down its stakes in Lebanon and gave money, weaponry, training, and a military backing of a Revolutionary Guard presence, the Shiite loyalties in Lebanon quickly shifted, and the Shiites became our primary adversaries in a guerrilla war. So from being potentially aligned with the Shiites at the beginning of the war, we were fighting the Shiites for the next decade or more. Ephraim Halevi also mentioned the Iran-Iraq war, which confronted us with this same dilemma. Do we go with the Shiites or do we go with the Sunnis? And the Sunnis were represented at that time by Saddam Hussein. And of course, we had revolutionary Iran under Ayatollah Khomeini, so which devil do you take? Now, as Ephraim Halevi said, there was a real debate. Questions came up. Saddam wanted to put up a pipeline carrying Iraqi oil to Aqaba. And there was some talk that he wanted reassurances that Israel wouldn't bomb the pipeline. So that's a decision, albeit somewhat indirect, to go with the Sunnis. And of course, Ephraim mentioned the Iran-Contra affair, which of course included the question of selling weapons to Iran, which is what Iran wanted in trade for hostages, arms for hostages. But it also involved an evaluation of whether the successors of Khomeini, in particular Rafsanjani, could become a potential partner with Israel. Big mistake. Rafsanjani, of course, was one of the people who promoted some of the worst terrorist attacks in the 1990s, from Argentina to Khobar Towers. So, in any event, this choice was a choice we had to make. The confrontation had become an armed militant confrontation between the Sunni world and the Shiite world. And now we're facing, again, the same choice. And the question is, how are the present circumstances different from those previous instances that we coped with? Right after 9/11, we had no thoughts about trying to work with the Iranians. The Iranians have been going from bad to worse. But we also had a serious Sunni problem, because what 9/11 revealed were that the sons of those Wahhabis who went into Karbala in 1802 had gone into the World Trade Center. Most of the hijackers in 9/11 were Saudis, surprisingly to many people who never thought of Saudi Arabia as a state supporting terrorism like Libya or Syria. And from our perspective here, back in the year 2003, if you wanted to find out who was the primary funder of Hamas, and this is at the time when we have buses blowing up with suicide bombers in the heart of Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and elsewhere, the primary funder of Hamas in 2003 was Saudi Arabia. Maybe 50%, maybe 70% of the Hamas budget came from Saudi Arabia. So if we're forced to make a choice between Saudi Arabia, the empire of Wahhabism, and revolutionary Iran, there was no real choice to make. Well, some things have changed since then, and we should be aware of them. In 2005, a new president was elected in Iran. You might remember that the Iranian leadership is shared by the supreme leader, who is really supreme, and that's today Ali Khamenei, and the president of Iran. We had gone through two presidents, Rafsanjani, who was a smart pragmatist, who some people mistakenly called a moderate, which he wasn't, and Khatami, who in the end turned out to be extremely weak in comparison to the strength of Ali Khamenei. Khatami is voted out, is no longer running for office in 2005, and the mayor of Iran, mayor of Tehran, is elected, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And his election is described by people who monitor Iran better than I do as the second Iranian revolution. And there's a sense that the ideological vigor of the Iranian revolution from 1979 is being renewed. That's the first big change that's occurring in comparison to the past. Second of all, in 2002, the Iranian opposition reveals to the world that Iran has been running, for at least a decade, a clandestine nuclear program. And we suddenly hear about places like Natanz and Isfahan, where the Natanz is the place where the uranium enrichment is occurring, and in Isfahan is the uranium conversion. And another place called Arak, where a heavy water reactor is being built. And it becomes clear as the confrontation between the West and Iran gets more clarified that Iran does not need nuclear energy, it needs nuclear weapons. So now we have a renewed Iranian revolution, a second Iranian revolution. We now have in Iran seeking to obtain nuclear weapons. And we have a president of Iran who doesn't talk about a dialogue of civilizations like Khatami, but he talks about wiping Israel off the map. And he doesn't say it once, he says it repeatedly. And he adds some more elements to it to give one a sense that the intentions on the Iranian side are looking more genocidal than they are just rhetorical. Now, what was remarkable this time, this round, in this confrontation between the Sunni world and the Shia and Shia Iran, are the reactions of the Arab states. The Arab states were aligned with Iraq, somewhat begrudgingly, back in the Iran-Iraq war. But now we have these incredible statements. King Abdullah of Jordan talking about a Shiite crescent beginning in Iran, stretching across a Shia-dominated Iraq through Alawite Syria, and the Alawites had some kind of semi-recognition as being part of the Shia world, even if Professor Lewis would doubt their having much common ground, and of course arriving into Lebanon under Hezbollah. So all of a sudden the Arab Sunnis are talking about Shiite encirclement with the shifting balance of power. President Mubarak begins making comments about the loyalty of Shiites to Iran in the Arab world, not loyal to their Arab Sunni leaders. And then after our disengagement from Gaza and Iran's decision to sort of take over sponsorship of the Hamas movement, we have President Mubarak saying that on his northern border, he has a shared border with Iran. So the geostrategic awareness of the Sunni Arab bloc to the Iranian problem seems far more pronounced today than in the past. Now, in the aftermath of both wars, the 2006 Second Lebanon War and our recent war in Gaza, we see the polarization between the Sunni bloc and Shiite Iran becoming stronger, with, of course, certain Arab states joining this bloc. Syria's been with Shiite Iran going back to the beginning of the Iran-Iraq war. That's not a new alignment. But all of a sudden, Qatar, who was our big friend in the Arab world in the 1990s, Qatar is sponsoring a conference for rehabilitation of the Gaza Strip. And who do they invite? And who stays away? Well, they invite the president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, to Qatar. The Egyptians, the Jordanians stay away from the Qatari conference. Unfortunately, the new rehabilitated post-Saddam Iraq attends the Qatari conference. And we see big shifts in the Arab world about this question of who are you with on the issue of Gaza. The Egyptians, on their part, invite the Jordanians to Sharm el-Sheikh with the leaders of the European states. So you have Europe backing Egypt and Jordan on programs for Gaza rehabilitation, which they want to keep out of the hands of Hamas, on the one hand, and you have Qatar, on the other hand, trying to form this bloc with Iran, Syria, unfortunately, as I say again, Iraq, and a few other states. They all get together in Kuwait, but the fundamental division has been established. We are now challenged about how we confront this situation. The fact that the Shia-Sunni split is, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this, the predominant conflict in the Middle East today, much more than our conflict, which we are very absorbed with, but when push comes to shove, that is the big conflict, and this is a much smaller drama. We're still confronted about what to do. Some of the thinking, in terms of practical policy, has been that we have to exploit, is maybe not the right word, but we have to manage this situation and develop an alliance with the Sunni bloc against this new renewed Shiite Iranian threat. And one of the approaches, for example, put forward was our idea of going to the Annapolis Peace Conference back in 2007, so that we form the basis of a political dialogue, and that allows the United States to form a firmer bloc against Iranian expansionism. I had, frankly, several problems with that as a practical policy. I never understood why our political dialogue with the Palestinians or with any other Arab states is a prerequisite for Saudi Arabia to defend itself from Iran. What we do or not do in the peace process should be based on the merits of that peace dialogue if we have a peace partner with the Palestinians or anybody else. But certainly Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are going to have to defend themselves and deal with the Iranian problem regardless of what we do in our side of the Middle East. But nonetheless, some people envisioned at Annapolis a linkage between the two. And I think that linkage is mistaken. Now, I'm the last person who should necessarily take into account how an Annapolis process will affect the internal security of our Sunni Arab neighbors. It's their problem, it's not my problem. But I was struck, if we had gone ahead and made great strides in the peace process and actually worked out something, would full normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia serve the interests of the internal stability of Saudi Arabia? Or would that put the Saudis in an awkward position in the face of Iranian propaganda against them? It's something to think about. Now, in fact, what we discovered is that some of our attempts to move elements of our relations with the Palestinians forward can have the exact opposite results of what we're planning. Many in Washington over the last number of years, and especially today, say we have to deny the Palestinian card from Ahmadinejad. Therefore, it's important for Israel to make new concessions, to come up with new forthcoming proposals, even if nothing comes out of it at this point in time. And I'm certain that when Israel offered to unilaterally disengage from the Gaza Strip, someone thought that that would serve that interest. It would make it much more difficult for Iran to wage a propaganda war on behalf of the Palestinians, because here Israel unilaterally pulled out. And there's a logic to that one could understand. But ironically, the whole thing backfired. And I don't want to get into the whole question of disengagement, yes, no, that's a whole debate for another time and another place. But what essentially happened was that rather than creating a political initiative that denied Ahmadinejad the Palestinian card, what we ended up creating was an Iranian base next to southern Israel and next to northern Sinai. Instead of weakening Iran strategically, as some people thought it might, we actually strengthened Iran. Of course, this is said with, like a Monday morning quarterback after the event has occurred. But it's something to take into account as we do policy planning in the future. What sometimes seems to service interest A can end up servicing the exact opposite interest. And that's what I think happened in the case of Gaza. So we have this Shiite-Sunni conflict. We have the Sunni Arab states very concerned about any aspect of Iranian power in this part of the Middle East. We even have Sunni Arab leaders grumbling, why didn't Israel finish off Hezbollah? And today, grumbling, why didn't Israel finish off Hamas? So that is the situation we have to work with, and what do we do practically? What policy choices should we make? And I'm just going to suggest one. I believe that in order to coordinate with countries that have been your adversary in the past, and may have an adversarial relationship with you at present, the last thing we should do is have a big international conference. We can talk to virtually any country in the Arab world. We can communicate with them. The communication on how to jointly handle the Iranian problem should be left to discrete channels. We have a lot to talk about. We have a lot we can do together. But I don't think we have to do these kinds of large ceremonial events that get you a good editorial in the Washington Post for a day, but don't get you much further than that. I'll stop here.